So let's kick this thing off with an absolute classic. A teacher gradebook where grading categories do not add up to 100%. Seriously, why is this still a thing in 2024? Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Mike the Principal podcast, where we dive into pretty much everything education. And today we are going to be tackling one of the greatest pet peeves that I have, and it revolves around grading practices. And grading practices in particular that just do not make any sense. And I've been waiting a long time to get this off of my chest, and today's episode is going to be the day where I really just get it off my chest and unload. I am Dr. Michael Meechin. I am the host of the Mike the Principal podcast. I am a disruptor of the status quo and parent of middle schoolers and a researcher and all of those things. And I'm really excited today to chat with all of you through grading systems that just don't add up. We are going to tackle and dive into tests that decide half of a student's grade. We are going to tackle why giving a 0 on a 100-point scale is really archaic thinking and can be an absolute death sentence for a student's GPA, and all of the other fun stuff that goes along with grading and assessment practices. It is one of my favorite topics to discuss. By the end of this episode, you might just want to throw your grade book out, right out the window. And I'm kidding, but I'm kind of not. So let's go ahead and get started. But just before we do that, don't forget, you can help me get the word out for important topics like today's episode to other educators by hitting the like and subscribe button, and make sure that you share this content with the educators in your life. All you got to do is hit that forward button to forward a link to them, share a link on your social media. It's greatly appreciated to like and subscribe. So today we are going to get into a really messy topic, and I will warn you, and a little bit of a disclaimer. Most people don't want to talk about grading because it's complicated. It is incredibly complicated, and it's messy. It is not fun. It is traditionally, for a very long time, been something that teachers have kept very close to themselves, driven by their personal beliefs or the experiences that they had as a student. So today, what we're going to do is really try to shake that up, and I'm going to break it down into several different categories. We're going to start by talking about grading that just doesn't add up. And this is really a classic that I dealt with as a school leader and now as a parent. And even in my job now, in the role that I play, and we do a lot of systems design work, grading and assessment practices are one of the largest systems that happen in a school on a daily basis and can really have a tremendous impact. So we're really going to dive in. And I remember, for this first part about grading that just doesn't add up, I remember coaching teachers or dealing with parent concerns, reviewing students' grades, and realizing that the grade categories in my teachers' grade books did not add up. And when I say that they didn't add up, they didn't total 100% of a student's grade. And it makes things really confusing. And if you can imagine with me for a second, if you're in a restaurant and you order a 3-course meal, right? You expect each course to clearly be defined and proportionate, right? Like in appetizers, 20%, the main course is 50%, dessert, maybe 30%. I don't know. I like dessert. Maybe it's a little bit higher than that, but that's how it's broken down in your overall dining experience. But what if the chef decided to bring out only half of your main course and skips the dessert and just gives you some extra breadsticks instead? You'd be sitting there and wondering what just happened to the rest of the meal. And that's what's happening when grade categories just don't add up to 100%. It's incomplete, it is confusing, and it doesn't give students a full meal, if you will, of what they deserve to understand their student progress. And I remember one time as a principal, a parent came to me in complete and total frustration. Their child's grade just didn't make any sense to them. And one category said 20%, another grading category said 40%, but somehow the final grade was totally skewed. And when you look at the teacher's grade book, it makes it really easy to understand. The categories did not total up to 100% of the total picture for this particular student. So parts of the grading system were missing for this child. And obviously for the parent, it becomes really, really confusing. And I would actually argue for the teacher, it was probably really confusing as well. Actually, not probably. It was really confusing to figure out where that student was in their academic progress. And it's like invisible pieces of a puzzle. Like, what is the result? The student's grade did not reflect what they actually knew, and it reflected a very, very broken system. And when it comes down to it, it's basic math. But when the numbers don't add up, neither do the grades. So it's not just a mistake, it's a misrepresentation of learning. We are shortchanging students and their parents by grading them on a system that doesn't even meet the most basic criteria, which is 100% that a student can earn or demonstrate academic learning. And that is a real challenge. So I would call on educators to really just do me a favor and do me a solid here, and educational leaders the same. Have you had these conversations with your staff? If not, go back and look at your grade books right now. I mean it. Like, pause this episode and pull up your grade book and check that everything is okay. Does everything add up in your grade book? You would be amazed at how often these kind of things get overlooked. And it's not like, I'm not saying this in a way that it is anybody's fault. It's not anybody's fault that this happens. It's an oversight. Sometimes it's a misunderstanding or lack of understanding of how grading and assessment actually works and impact. I am not a great math student. So for me, when you start throwing percentages and weights and all those things, that can become really confusing. But I would ask, if you're a teacher, have you checked on this? If you're a school leader, have you discussed this with your staff? Do not assume that all is well. So that's what happens when grades don't add up, right? The other piece that I want to chat about today is the one test catastrophe. And I want to talk about the single test horror show that can happen in a student's grade. And you know the one that I'm talking about. It's where there's only one assessment or test in a category, but that category might be worth 50% of the student's overall grade. Like, are we actually grading an entire course of work on one grade that makes up 50% of the student's coursework? Like, that is bonkers. And we really need to make sure that we don't have these one test catastrophes happening in our schools. School is about practicing and getting feedback and demonstrating your learning after you've received feedback. It's okay to not do well. It should not be penalized by a grade that makes up 50% of your final grade. This actually recently happened to me with one of my kids, and it as a parent, it was incredibly frustrating. Obviously, I bring my principal perspective to the table too, and I'm sure that the teachers absolutely love me. But one test was worth half of the grade for the marking period. And you think about that for 1 second, right? Like, one day off, one bad night's sleep, one student who just needs some more time with the content to demonstrate their learning, and boom, you are doomed. And your grade is really destroyed for that entire marking period, potentially off of one assessment or one test. This type of grading practice as well leads to skewed results, and it does not provide a clear picture of what the student really knows when you look at the final grade. And that's really the most important part of this topic, is that is a challenge. And I want to paint a picture for you. Imagine that we have a student, her name is Sarah, who's been working hard all semester. She participates in class, she does her homework, she shows steady improvement in her understanding of the content, but then halfway through the marking period, there's a big unit test, and that test, well, it's worth 50% of her entire grade. Now, on the day of the test, Sarah's sick. She's not feeling well. She's got a fever, a headache, and the works. But she pushes through. She takes the assessment, and not surprisingly, she absolutely bombs it. So that's it. Like, she's done. Despite the effort that she's put in over the past few weeks, the one bad mark absolutely tanks her entire grade for the marking period. Despite all the effort that she's put in over the past few weeks, one bad day tanks her entire grade for the marking period. And it didn't matter that she had an understanding of the content overall. What mattered is that the one test determined her academic fate. This is the reality of single test grading. It does not reflect what Sarah knew or how much she had grown over the course of a marking period. It just captured one moment in time. That's not fair. It is not fair for her, for any student. It doesn't also give the teacher an academic representation or true representation of what Sarah knows academically. And teachers and leaders, I am begging you to please look and see if your assessments are diversified. If you only have one major test or assessment that is making up 50% of a student's grade, you're not assessing learning. You're seriously impacting a student's grade with ineffective grading practices, and you are not assessing what the student knows. It's as simple as that. The third topic that I want to discuss today, and like I told you at the top of the show, this has been weighing on me. I want to say for a long time, but I mean a long time. I wrote my master's thesis in 2010 about this. So that's 14 years, right? That I have just been dying to get this off my chest, and it really just needs to be talked about. And no one's doing anything wrong. We want to talk about how do we improve this practice, but in order to improve, you have to talk about the reality that exists. And this next one, we're gonna get into it now. We're gonna talk about the dreaded zero. And when I say dreaded zero, I'm talking about a zero on a 100-point scale. You have to include that. You can't just say zeros are bad. Zeros are bad on a 100-point scale. And this one hits really close to home for me as a parent educator. I have seen firsthand how destructive a zero can be on a 100-point scale. And to be honest with you, I've been on the receiving end as a student because I was not an exceptional high school student or middle school student, and zeros really impacted my overall progress. They can be a GPA demolisher. They can absolutely demolish a GPA. I want to quote Douglas Reeves real quick, who's one of my heroes in this particular space. To insist on the use of a zero on a 100-point scale is to assert that work that is not turned in deserves a penalty that is many times more severe than in work that is done poorly. In no other profession or part of life do we penalize people so harshly for a single failure. And this is what Reeves is talking about, right? Why are we doing this to students in the classroom? If you do not succeed on your driver's license, you are able to retake and reassess. If you do not pass your teaching licensure exam, you are able to reassess. So why would we do this to students? A zero on a 100-point scale is like giving a student an academic life sentence with no chance of parole. And I wrote in my dissertation, grades become meaningless when they are influenced by factors that have nothing to do with learning. The integrity of an assessment is lost when we allow effort, behavior, and arbitrary penalties like zeros to distort the true measure of student performance. And as I found in my own research, the use of zeros isn't just a grading flaw. It destroys the integrity of our entire assessment system. When we let arbitrary zeros creep into the grades, we lose sight of what we're really supposed to be measuring, and that is student learning. Giving a student a zero on a 100-point scale is like tossing them into a mathematical hole, a grading abyss, if you will, and saying, good luck climbing out. That 1-0, it can be an anvil attached to the weight of their grade. And some students are not able to mathematically recover from that. So if you're using zeros on a 100-point scale, I challenge you to next time ask yourself, am I teaching my students a lesson, or am I setting them up for failure? Which one? Let's move away from the use of punishment in grading practice and focus on a scale that allows for students to recover when they make a mistake. And there are scales that allow students to do that. I am going to, and I'll recap this at the end, but I am going to be talking about that in a future episode about, all right, here's what is happening. Here are our realities. How do we fix that? Both as a teacher, as a school leader, as an educator, okay? And I want to close today by talking about another area that I focused on in my dissertation about the hodgepodge effect. And Thomas Guskey has talked about and wrote about the hodgepodge effect for quite some time, but something that I discovered at a deep level while I was writing my dissertation, you've seen it, right? Like, it's grades that mix in all sorts of things. And it might be effort, it might be behavior, it might be bringing in a box of tissues to the teacher that impacts, actually is in the student's grade. Whether my student gets his syllabus signed on time or not tells me nothing about his or her academic performance. So are we grading student learning, or are we grading things that are not related to academic outcomes that students are ultimately accountable for? I'm asking. Like, I want you to actually think about that. I'm genuinely asking, what are we doing? And I want to tell you about a student named Daniel. He's bright. He understands the material. But when you look at his report card, you would never know it. It's a bizarre mix of things that have nothing to do with his learning. His teacher gave him points on being polite, on raising his hand, on bringing in supplies, etc. The points that boosted his grade, even though they had nothing to do with the content, he was learning, but they inflated his grade. We talk a lot of the arguments that I get about a lot of the reforms that I'm talking about today are that it causes grade inflation. Well, so doesn't many of the other practices that we just let happen in school. Here's the kicker though. Daniel lost points for turning in homework late a few times, even though he had solid reasons for being behind, right? And again, it's about building relationships with kids. That is always part of the equation. None of those penalties, though, were tied to whether he knew the material. And in the end, Daniel's grade didn't reflect how he understood algebra. Instead, it reflected how well he could follow arbitrary instructions for a variety of things that didn't ultimately talk about learning. And that's a challenge. This is the hodgepodge effect in full swing. We are not grading student learning. Instead, we are grading compliance, behavior, and other things like effort. And it is muddying the waters of students' learning and what they may know. So teachers and school leaders, if your teachers are grading anything that isn't directly tied to the learning content, you need to hit reset. Let's give grades that measure what students actually know, not what they're good at, if they're good at raising their hand or other arbitrary pieces like that. I told you at the top, I warned you, we covered a lot today, from grades that don't add up to one test chaos to soul crushing zeros, and then the mysteries of hodgepodge grading. But I want you to share with me, and you can comment on social media, you can drop a note, regardless of where you're listening. Hit me up on social media and let me know how have grading practices affected you, both as a practitioner, as a principal, as an educator, a teacher, as a parent. I've been on both sides of this, trying to fix grading as a school leader, but also trying to explain it to my own kid at the kitchen table. And that's a challenge. So we need to all commit to doing better for our students when it comes to grading and assessment. We have to review our policies, we have to clean up our grade books, and most importantly, make sure that your grades tell the truth about what kids actually know as they relate to academic content and academic standards. If you're nodding along and ready to make some change, please share this episode with your fellow educators. Like, let's fix this grading madness together. It is about time to do this work. Thanks for listening. As always, I am Mike Meechin. This is the Mike the Principal podcast. If you have crazy grading stories or want to talk more about fixing the systems or other systems in your school or district, drop me a message, follow me on social media. Let's keep this conversation going. Next episode, I will be talking about how do we tackle some of these challenges as a school leader and as a classroom teacher. What can I do to make it work? So be sure to subscribe. And as always, I appreciate the work that you do. It is incredibly difficult work that you all are doing in education. So I appreciate that tremendously. Keep up the good work. Help me get the word out by clicking the like and subscribe button now, and be sure to share this with your favorite educators. It is always greatly appreciated. Until next time, see ya.